Good afternoon, friends. Steve Ben-Nun here with Israeli News Live, and we got a few headlines here I'm going to talk to you about here on the news. Things that you already are well aware of, and I've got a good friend of mine, Brother Bill. I call him my brother's twin because he looks just like my brother. But anyway, Brother Bill, he lives out here in LA, and of course, he has been trying to help people the best he can. He said, it really is sad you have to smuggle food in to be able to help those that are starving because they just don't want to let anything in, no humanitarian supplies or anything. It's a crime. And another thing that made me really think about this too, this picture right here, posted yesterday by Awakening Canada on Facebook, the blue roof houses and the houses without smart meters are still standing in California. Reminds me of Deborah Tavares and her always talking about those smart meters and how they could be used against you in the not so distant future. And so that's kind of an interesting thought in itself. And we're going to have Deborah on actually tomorrow. In fact, we got a couple of special guests this week coming on. Deborah will be one I'll have on tomorrow. It'll air a little bit later, but we will have that on. And but it's just really sad to see, everything that's happening there. It's almost like they're taking advantage of this drought system, not to mention. Deborah will tell you, no doubt, that even the weather is manipulated by forces there. She will share with you the documentation to prove it and back it up for all that she has to say there. Also, too, they are claiming that they have reached a deal with Hezbollah to release all the hostages. And, of course, I'm going to play here for you John Kirby and what John had to say about that particular deal. Listen in.
We worked on this as a team. It was the negotiation that started in this administration, and certainly the deal that the president laid forward in May that eventually got over the finish line. But it was really critical, and the president made it clear to us on the national security team that we needed to make sure that the Trump team, in particular Mr. Witkoff, were part and parcel and fully invested in everything we were doing because they were going to own it when we left office. And so Mr. Witkoff traveled to the region. He and Brett McGurk, our special coordinator for the Middle East, talked multiple times a day over the last week or so as we were getting down to the fine details and trying to get it over the finish line. And Mr. Witkoff himself credited the work that he was able to enjoy by working with us. But look, the bottom line was getting the deal, getting the hostages home, getting the war to end, and both President-elect Trump and certainly President Biden shared that goal and made sure that their teams also shared that outcome.
So there you have it. Finally, the Israeli hostages will be going home. Some of those, of course, other nationalities as well. So thank God for that. And thank God this war will come to an end. At least I'm hoping it's going to come to an end. We'll have to wait to see what really does happen, or whether or not Israel will continue to make these people's lives a total misery. The Gaza people have suffered like never before in the history of humanity, as any people suffered as badly as they have suffered, which is really a stain on the flag of Israel. For allowing that to happen in light of the fact of what so many Jewish people had suffered during the Holocaust there. I want to play this clip here. Fringe, we had Fringe on a little while back there, played some interesting thoughts here from Tucker Carlson over the idea of entities or aliens, extraterrestrials. Are they from another world or are they from this earth? Well, they're definitely some inner earth beings. In fact, when I conclude with this section here, I'll continue to record and you'll be able to listen to a very strange event that I went through myself here not too long ago that I finally have decided to share over on Patreon. I'm going to be sharing some pretty odd details. And it's going to include some clips here from Admiral Byrd to back up some of the thoughts that I want to share with you. But that will be basically this interview in its entirety will be over on Patreon. But the part that I'm going to share there, I just don't want to necessarily really put this out publicly as of yet. Whether or not I ever will, I don't know. But at least I'll share it with our Patreons there. And if you want to see that, you could do that. It's very strange. It's a very strange event that happened to me here a couple of months ago, and I'm going to break my silence on that for the first time. So if you want to see that, just check out the description below, patreon.com/Israeli News Live. Let's continue on here with Tucker Carlson.
It's my personal belief, based on a fair amount of evidence, that they're not aliens. They've always been here. And I do think it's spiritual. That's my view. So, and again, it's not provable, but based on the evidence, I think.
I'm with you.
Absolutely. If the U.S. government has in fact had direct contact with these beings, whatever they are, I've already told you what I think they are, and has entered into some sort of agreement with them, which is the claim of informed people, I would say. Whether they're right or wrong, I can't say conclusively. But if that is true, I mean, it's a very, very, very heavy thing.
Yeah. A lot of people say interdimensional beings.
Right. I want to ask, are angels and demons, or how would you describe these beings?
You know, these are, again, I'm getting into the realm of conjecture, so I just want to say that flat out.
Entity?
But one thing I know for a dead certain fact, having seen it, is that there is good and evil, that we are being acted upon at all times. And I think every person can feel that in himself. I mean, there are moments when you are moved to do things that are much better than you actually are, and that are also more evil and destructive than you actually are. You are subject to forces from outside yourself. That is absolutely true. Now, we can argue about what they are, but every person in the room, if he's reflective, will tell you, yes, I know what you're talking about.
And there you have it right there from Tucker Carlson. And what he said in this interview here, I found that very fascinating. And but I'm also a bit concerned. I'm a bit concerned because are we being set up to accept these entities? I don't think Tucker is, or at least I would hope he's not playing that role. But it is concerning. Let's take a pause here. Join us over on Patreon for the rest of the broadcast. Moving on, guys. Admiral Byrd here. This is something I want to share a couple of things for you. But as I before I go to disclose the information I'm going to share with you now. This is one here. This is where Admiral Byrd, when they first celebrated his Arctic and Antarctic research trips there. Listen to this.
The year is 1930. In New York Harbor, an escorting Armada of Honor clusters about a battered, weather-beaten bark, home from an historic exploration of the Antarctic. Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd is in command, first man to conquer the North and South Poles by air. Millions of New Yorkers turned out in a thrilling tribute to the daring explorer whose achievements had won the admiration and acclaim of the entire world.
That was part of the news going on back in those days there. And then we also had, and I actually got a copy of this, The Lost Diary of Admiral E. Byrd, that was shocking in itself. And before I play that there, I want to play this little clip here. This man right here was the oldest man. It was 2 years ago. He was 102 years old. Chief Robert Johnson, who was on the Antarctic trip with Admiral Byrd. Listen to this here. This was amazing to think that this guy has lived all this time here and was actually on the Antarctica trip.
A young sailor from our first coast offering a handshake to a penguin who I don't think is particularly sure about this human next to him. Now that young sailor, though, is 102 years old.
102, and today a special honor for this veteran of our greatest generation. As Rich Donnelly reports tonight, he truly went to the ends of the earth to serve.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
It was time to celebrate at Beach Diner in Atlantic Beach today.
Happy birthday to you.
I sure didn't expect all this, I'll tell you. It's really something.
Bob Johnson turned 102, but his age is only the beginning of his incredible accomplishments.
I had an exciting Navy career, I really did.
After joining the Navy in 1937, Johnson is the last surviving member of Admiral Byrd's expeditions to the Antarctic, a crew that explored and mapped more than 500,000 square miles of Antarctica that had never been seen before.
That's amazing. And the condition this man was in only 2 years ago. I didn't look up before going on air to see whether or not he's still living or not. It would certainly be nice to know that he's still carrying on a little bit longer there. He's just seemed to be amazing health and very good spirits when he spoke there at his birthday party there at 102 years old. That was 2 years ago there. Kind of exciting to see that. But this is what's really important. I'm kind of setting the stage for something that I went through here recently, and I don't know what to call it. I don't know if to call it a vision. I don't know if to call it, I don't know what to call it. I have talked to some people about it, and I've done a lot of research, and I have come across some information that may help me to realize what has happened is not such a fantasy. Let's listen into this right here with Admiral Byrd, them reading his diary here.
And relay information concerning colorations in the ice and snow below. Both magnetic and gyro compasses beginning to gyrate and wobble. We are unable to hold our heading by instrumentation. Take bearing with sun compass, yet all seems well. The controls are seemingly slow to respond and have sluggish quality, but there is no indication of icing. In the distance is what appears to be mountains. 29 minutes elapsed flight time from the first sighting of the mountains. It is no illusion. They are mountains and consisting of a small range that I have never seen before. Altitude changed to 2,950 feet, encountering strong turbulence again. We are crossing over the small mountain range and still proceeding northward as best as can be ascertained. Beyond the mountain range is what appears to be a valley with a small river or stream running through the center portion. There should be no green valley below. Something is definitely wrong and abnormal here. We should be over ice and snow. To the port side are great forests growing on the mountain slopes. Our navigation instruments are still spinning. The gyroscope is oscillating back and forth. I alter altitude to 1,400 feet and execute a sharp left turn to better examine the valley below. It is green with either moss or a type of tight-knit grass. The light here seems different. I cannot see the sun anymore. We make another left turn and we spot what seems to be a large animal of some kind below us. It appears to be an elephant. No. It looks more like a mammoth. This is incredible. Yet, there it is. Decrease altitude to 1,000 feet and take binoculars to better examine the animal. It is confirmed, it is definitely a mammoth-like animal. Report this to base camp. Encountering more rolling green hills now. The external temperature indicator reads 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Continuing on our heading now. Navigation instruments seem normal now. I am puzzled over their actions. Attempt to contact base camp. Radio is not functioning.
This was a secret diary that he put together because he felt like that if he didn't, and he felt like that it may not ever see the light of day. But it did. And there are some people that dispute the authenticity of it, and maybe so. I have heard of others that, through intelligence circles there, that have talked about that opening on the earth does exist. In fact, they say, of course, the picture shows like a C-130 flying or something like that over the Arctic, which it wasn't. We know that. He was in a prop plane. But nonetheless, there are those that have reported that when you go to fly over the North Pole there, the Arctic there, you don't even realize. The next thing you know, you're going into this inner Earth. Admiral Byrd actually talked about it as being like a, how would you describe it? He says, he says, the temperature was 74 degrees. There's just so many things that he said that just really kind of struck me. And but then I had this really odd experience myself. And that's what I want to share with you guys. I don't know what to call it. But it happened one night, and all I can tell you is it wasn't like a dream, because everything that happened to me happened very systematically. It did not go from one point to another. It was systematic. Everything was very much in color. And I started off, I was standing on a dock. It was not a large dock, but there were several ships that were there, and it was kind of like a misty fog kind of look. I know that the area that I was at was very cold, and there were sailors getting ready to board this ship, and I was actually going to board it as well. But the ship, though, the first thing that I noticed, though, these ships that were sitting there were nothing like I had ever seen in my life. In fact, I have done my dead level best to try to find something similar to it. I have found some boats that they have built that are small boats that are using this type technology as a future technology. But these were the best way I could describe it. If you've seen a ship that they are futuristic type ships that they call drone ships, it was more like a drone type of ship. It had a flat deck, kind of a little bit of an arch on the top of it, like that of an aircraft carrier, but nowhere near the size of an aircraft carrier. But it was a large ship. Several of them that were in port, they were different. The one that I was looking at, I was facing the side of it, and there were a couple others out at a distance. But the odd thing was, at the stern of the ship was a mast going up, a single mast with like a prop, almost like an airplane prop, but a very large airplane prop mounted on there. And my thought was, though, it's like I kind of knew what this was. It wasn't a windmill, although it had kind of a look similar to a windmill. This ship would use a wind power, almost kind of like an airboat would, to move it forward. But it was not like that. It's kind of hard to explain. I just kind of knew what it was. The ships, though, were designed to have personnel carrier wet subs on the interior of the hull of the ship. And if I remember right, it was like when you go down inside the ship, they had like 3 different subs. They were on a rail. They would open up this box, so to speak, or this tube, a pressurized tube. The sub would go in. They would open the nose of the sub, and then you would load into that sub. Then that would close off. That would be ejected out of the rear of the ship, and maybe this is why this thing had this thing on the top, because the way the ship was designed was that the subs would come into the front and out the back. So they couldn't have a prop going out the back of the ship or an engine room, so to speak. It had to be totally designed differently. And quite frankly, if you've ever heard of anything like this, I would love to know, because I'm bewildered by it. But at any rate, I don't know exactly how many men this sub could carry, but I would say 20 people, maybe not. Maybe it's only a dozen. But I do know that there were 2 rows of double row seats inside of it. When I came down inside of it, they were already loading one of the subs into the chamber, and then they were closing the door to that chamber. I did a lot of research trying to find anything remotely similar to what I'm telling you about. And I did find that that the Navy itself does have, or at least what we're aware of today, they have many subs that the Navy SEALs use to do their operations with. And I would say that what you're looking at here, that's about the size the sub was. Now, I can't say that it looked like that, because the one that I was going into, it actually, the front of the hull opened up and you went inside of it through that direction there. But the strange thing, I did know I was with the Navy. I remember the commanding officer that was at the front of the hatch where we were going in at. I was loading up in there. There was one guy who's really kind of goofy, right? He's like crawling under the seat or something, like some kind of goofball. But someone asked about me, what am I doing on that ship or on that sub? And I remember the commanding officer mentioning something like, oh, he's just a Marine, you know. He's got to go with us. But another thing, let me just show you here. That's just that one particular sub. Let me find the right one there. This one here, and that's the same sub I believe you just looked at right there, or similar to it. If you notice on this picture right here, and I'm going to do my best. Ooh, I think it's going to make it go back small again. It did. Okay, hang on. Let me back it back down again. In this picture right here, you can see they have 2 rows of seats in there, but they're just single file seats. So what I was on was larger than what that one is there. And then in this image here, they're showing, this is more, and by the way, this is almost identical to the way it was set up, except that we were facing to the front of the sub with the rows of seats in there. And again, that's a very small one there. So I don't, like I said, I would have to guess. I've thought maybe 20 people or something before, but it could be only a dozen. It might be only, I know it has to be at least a dozen though, because I do know that the way the seats were set up in there, maybe even 20 could go in that sub. But they would put us inside of the chamber there, and then they flooded the chamber. But we were definitely, though, in a wet sub. And now the military does have wet subs. Let me just kind of show you what a wet submarine looks like that the Navy SEALs do use. It's a smaller one. In fact, this particular submarine that I found was actually, although it's not the... let me go to, let's see, we'll visit the page where this one here is at, if I can get to it without everything being lost every time you do something. Yeah, here we go. They're not going to know, that's not going to show it. Let's go back. Maybe I think there'll be a different picture that will show more of that on there. I've not seen that one before, but again, that's another that's a wet boat. It looks like, not a wet sub. But there's one where they're standing there because that one actually attaches to the top of a submarine, is what it does. And then there's an open hatch. Because here we go again, that's it right there. That's where they're getting in and out of that sub on that particular one. But the hatch itself is kind of interesting because it reminds me of what they had inside the ship. There we go again. That's Navy SEALs inside that. And that's what you call a wet sub. So the sub helps get you there, but you have to wear your mask and stuff. And that's I did have, but instead of using a respirator, we had a full face mask on. So we breathed, the oxygen was coming through our mask, so we didn't have to have the regulator in our mouth. That was the one difference that we did have. But I was hoping to find that picture there where they're showing, there it is again, there it is right here. Because that one thing where they show the door opening on there, where it's just a hatch where they're putting it inside of its compartment, is very similar to what I had saw as well. And I don't see it right off, so I'm not going to waste the time on it. But then the second thing happens. Once we went in and the chamber flooded, and then we go out of the tail end of the ship here, once we were deployed to sea there, for some reason I knew we were near some type of Arctic region, whether it was Antarctica, whether it was the Arctic on the North Pole side of the Earth. I don't know for sure, but we were in one of those places. And I can't say that we went underneath the ice, but for some reason it seemed like that's what we were doing. We were accessing, and there were 3 of our subs that were launched, military subs that were launched, and we were going to a destination. And I remember the commander telling us before we, or actually when we actually got to where we were going and we landed there, we actually come into a little docking port. And the water, I remember being like god-awful cold. My gosh, it was cold. And which another thing that was interesting too, the Navy guys there, they were wearing like a green fatigue even though they were inside a wet sub. And oddly enough, the SEALs use a green fatigue even though they are in the water. That was another interesting thing that I noted about this. And but we get there, and once we'd surfaced and we came out, we were getting out, gathering up our gear and stuff. The CO said to us, that's commanding officer for the people who don't understand that, he said to us that we needed to, as we go up on land here, that we're not to have any kind, he didn't use the word fraternization, he just said don't have anything to do with the locals. And I didn't really know what he meant by that, but as I'm going up, it's like a little bit of an incline of a hill there that I'm going up, and I remember looking up, seeing the trees, and they were so deadgum tall. Kind of like a palm tree, but very, very tall. And the temperature was, it was very mild. It wasn't hot. It wasn't like a tropical place, but it was mild. And it's kind of interesting because when I look at what Admiral Byrd said about that one place that he went to, that he saw that mammoth, and I remember being told years ago that there were that types of creatures inside the inner earth there. But it was kind of like that type of a temperature. And I remember seeing this one guy, his military guy, who was wearing his green fatigues, but he had a t-shirt on. He's playing some kind of racket game. As I walked past him going up the hill there, and I was going to an atrium of some sort, and there was a sign. I forget what the sign said on there that I was reading, but then I got my first experience of what he meant by don't have anything to do with the locals. This woman comes up to me, and although she looked human, for some reason I knew she wasn't, and she was extremely tall. I would say 6'2", because she was taller than I am. I'm right at 6 foot, and she was maybe 6'2", 6'3". She had short hair, and her hair was kind of tight to her head, but it wasn't thin. It was kind of thick, but a little odd type of hair, not anything I'm used to seeing. And she made an advance at me, and of course I immediately jerked away from her. I didn't want anything to do with her. But then there was an alarm that went off, and for some reason I knew that alarm that was going off was that we had to return to ship immediately. And as I took off running, in fact, that was what was really strange too, because I've not been able to run in about 15 years. But I ran as if I was 19 years old. And when I got back to the ship there, which it wasn't a long, long way, maybe 100 yards away from where I was at, and for some reason I heard something about there was an issue, and they actually named a country, and I wanted to say it was like Sweden or something like that. We were having some kind of issue that was going on. I don't know what the case was. We did not deploy back into the ship at that time. We were still waiting for orders of what to do. But I remember when all this happened, then suddenly I came out of this. And like I said, I don't know if I went into a vision or what had happened. But it's kind of baffled me ever since, especially the details. And then what was really interesting is 15 years I've not been able to run. And I was down in Florida when this happened, by the way. And it was the next day. I thought, I bet I can still run. I bet I could run. And for the first time in 15 years, I actually ran. Not jogged, I ran. I couldn't even jog. That's how bad off I had been from my back injury. And but that was kind of odd in itself, you know. And I don't know what to think of this. Like, right? It's just like, this is the craziest stuff. There's one reason why I decided just to run this on Patreon rather than making this full-fledged public. Because it's one of those things that's just really strange, you know, and I wasn't asleep, I know that, so I just don't know what to think about it. But I figured I'd share with you, I mean, especially the type ships that we were on. I've asked around some people and everything. No one has ever heard of that. I had people tell me that there were such things as wet subs. I didn't know that at the time. I thought that was kind of awkward that we were going into a sub and yet the sub's going to flood with water, you know. But it did, and you know. But you know, I remember my mask leaking, and the water got right up around my chin, and I'm like, oh, and I reached back. And I knew just what to do, and I cinched it right up, stopped the water from leaking, and I was able to go the whole trip in. But that was pretty strange. If you got any ideas on this, though, share it with me, especially if you've ever seen anything or if you've heard of things of this types of, especially that ship with this. You know, I wish I could draw it. You know, I wish I could show you what I saw. There's just nothing. I do remember thinking one thing. I'll never forget this. While I was standing there looking at that, and I saw this one guy going across the deck, and I thought to myself, "Good night." That thing, once that big old prop gets turning, that thing suck you in there, it'd kill you instantly. So for some reason in my mind, it's not that it was driven because of wind using that. That was almost like an airboat type of scenario. And the only thing I could figure is because the way the subs were on the rail going in and out of the ship, the way they were, that's the way they drove the ship. I don't know. It's crazy. Very crazy. Anyway, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your patience for listening to something as radical as that could be. God bless you. Thank you so much. Pray, though, for the people. Pray for those hostages that are being released, that'll go off smoothly. Pray for the Palestinians that their suffering can finally come to an end. The PTSD these people suffer, though, no doubt, is absolutely horrendous beyond belief. And also to pray for the people of the California wildfires. Those people over in North Carolina still in tremendous shape from that hurricane that went up through there a little while back. Keep those people in your prayers as well. And we certainly greatly appreciate you. God bless you. Thank you for listening. Stephen Ben-Nun with Israeli News Live.